integrated national financing frameworks. We're really excited to launch some joint guidance on this topic, UNDP and UN Women together. And, just to give you a little bit of a structure for the session, I'll share a few words. My name is Tom Bilo. I'm the SDG Finance Advisor with UNDP based in New York, who's coordinating our efforts as UNDP on the Integrated National Financing Frameworks. I'll say a few words around the INFF in general and the importance of gender equality and its integration into the INFF before handing over to Katie from UN Women, who will provide an overview of the joint guidance. And then we're going to hear from most importantly, from some country experiences in trying to bring gender equality into INFFs at the national level, before my colleague Aroa Santiago from UNDP will help moderate some discussion, hopefully fielding some of your own perspectives from wherever you might sit, whichever agency you sit in, whichever country you sit in, what you might see as some of the challenges and opportunities for bringing gender equality and women's empowerment into integrated national financing frameworks in the context of discussion of SDG finance writ large. So please, I know these webinars, as I know you all do, inside out by now. We have a chat function. So please, within the chat function, begin to ask questions, give your contributions, add perspectives, resources, whatever you might have to share. Please do so right from the get-go, right from the start of proceedings, right from now, so that we have a lively interaction. But of course, we'll be really looking forward to your interactions during the discussion time after the country presentations. Let me just say a few words about the integrated national financing frameworks for those perhaps who know a little less about it or just want a little bit more information about where they've come from. Back in 2015, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda agreed at the Financing for Development Conference, included a commitment from member states to develop integrated national financing frameworks. And these were seen at the time within the Addis Ababa Action Agenda as a core country commitment to work across the flows of finance that are covered in the agenda and try and bring these different flows of finance behind national development plans and sustainable development strategies at the country level. And since then, there has been a significant amount of work led by the UN, UNDESA in particular, leading methodological work. And you'll see on the right of this slide the 4 building blocks that they've been focusing on in their methodological work, looking at how assessment and diagnostics and financing strategies and governance and coordination mechanisms and monitoring and review processes can be put in place, which to all intents and purposes address missing middle, a gap that I think we're all aware of, which is a gap between policy and finance, a gap between planning, plans, and financing strategies. In fact, a lot of the work is based around this missing middle, and there was some research done a few years back now by the University of Manchester and the World Bank, which really starkly put in front of us the statistics around this, which was that of over 100 countries that were treated in the research, which had national development plans, only 20% of those countries had any kind of costing to those plans. Very few of them articulated in their budgets and medium-term development plans the same priorities that were explicitly referenced in the plans. And even fewer countries looked beyond public finance to how private finance might be mobilized behind national development priorities. So the Integrated National Financing Framework agenda is explicitly trying to address that gap, to make the link between policy, planning, and finance. It's very much a UN endeavor, and this is why it's great to be able to launch today this joint work with UN Women. There are a number of UN agencies involved. I mentioned UNDESA. There's also work with UNICEF looking at the child dimensions, child-friendly dimensions of financing strategies, looking at social policy. There's work with UNEP looking at environmental and climate dimensions. There's work with ILO looking at employment, social protection dimensions. But of course, today we're focusing on gender equality and the importance of gender equality within the INFF. Let me just say that, we as the UN, in our role in the finance agenda, come at it from the central perspective that finance is not neutral, that finance has an impact on equity and sustainability on the SDGs, and that we are playing a role to try and harness an understanding of those impacts and work with those impacts towards the SDGs. In other words, an INFF, is not performing a function of linking finance and policy if it is not addressing issues of gender equality. And that's why this discussion is so important. And indeed, if one looks at how finance can address issues of gender equality, we're also, by the very nature of the topic, looking at how finance can impact across the SDGs. So gender equality is clearly a central part of our work on finance as the UN, as UNDP, as UN Women. And that's why this seminar today is so important. We have another seminar tomorrow for other time zones, but this is our first, so we're really pleased to be in discussion with all of you today. There are over 70 countries involved in the INFF work. Of course, we won't be able to hear from all of them today, but I know Katie and colleagues here on the call will be working very hard to ensure that gender equality is embedded in all of those countries engaging with the INFF work. The guidance we launched today is just the beginning. We'll learn from you and the work that you're doing at the country level to try and improve upon that guidance, deepen it in different areas. But we're really pleased that it's a fantastic start to our endeavor together to bring finance towards the SDGs and gender equality as part of that. With that, I think I'll hand straight over to Katie, who'll carry us through with a presentation of the guidance, and then we'll be looking forward to the country presentations after that. Katie, over to you.
Thank you so much, Tom. And I'll just get started here. I hope everyone can hear me. So thank you. And let me just say also, good morning, good afternoon, and evening, colleagues. I'm so pleased to be able to join this global webinar and introduce the technical guidance note on mainstreaming gender equality in INFFs. And as Tom mentioned, this guidance note is co-produced by UN Women and UNDP in alignment with the global INFF methodology, and really, aligned also with the INFF building blocks, or endeavoring to do so. And I just want to, as I start introducing this, I just really want to acknowledge all the contributions and insights that have been provided by UN Women, by UNDP, across these institutions to support the production of this guidance. So, in starting the conversation, I think it's just important for us to kind of orient this to why do we mainstream gender? So as Tom referenced, I think quite clearly, the centrality of gender equality for effective financing. And for that very reason, we really see this as a central piece of all of the stages and steps of developing an INFF towards the development of a holistic financing strategy and the implementation of this. But just here, I wanted to just pause for a moment and just highlight a few points. First, I think important to just reference that human rights principles and normative frameworks do provide this very strong foundation, including the Addis Ababa Action Agenda that Tom mentioned, for gender mainstreaming in all policy strategies and institutions, including those related to and supportive of financing sustainable development. And INFFs offer really important entry points for advancing gender equality and women's empowerment. But of course, we know that this requires, and taking advantage of those entry points really does require strong political commitment, grounded by analysis, as well as efforts towards, continued efforts towards execution. And it is also very much dependent on strong coordination. And that's why this discussion is so critically important, because it's demonstrating some of those efforts in coordination. And here I just also want to say that, we know that if national financing policies and strategies fail to account for and address the differential impacts on women and men, then they are constrained in terms of their effectiveness and really cannot deliver on these commitments to gender equality and more broadly to sustainable development. And finally, the evidence is really clear that strengthening investment from all sources, public, private, domestic, international, towards gender equality and women's empowerment, advances sustainable development in alignment with human rights and normative commitments, and also does pay dividends, both tangible and intangible, including in the current pandemic context. So to get to the kind of crux of it and talk a little bit more in detail about the guidance note itself, I just wanted to emphasize a few points. This is a technical guidance note. It's been shared with the announcement for the event, and I hope that everyone will have an opportunity, if you haven't already, to review it in some detail. But again, just to say that it aligns broadly with INFF building blocks, and it does provide guidance via a set of kind of a diverse set of questions, case examples, and suggested frameworks and data sources to support national efforts in INFF development. And I think that's really central and critical. This is about guidance that is aimed at and really intended to support all national efforts, in various contexts, various realities. And so we hope that this proves useful in that regard. And I just wanted to emphasize the focus here on a few kind of key aspects of the guidance, and I'll go into a bit more detail in the next few slides. But here I wanted to emphasize the importance across the guidance on strong, meaningful participatory engagement of gender experts and advocates at each stage of the process. This central kind of piece around mapping the landscape, knowing what exists in terms of gender data, gender analysis, and where there are gaps that need to be filled. And to that point, having the expertise, the understanding, as well as the tools and guidance to conduct necessary analyses, gender analyses, as well as to complement existing analyses and data to integrate a gender perspective where feasible. And here again, just to emphasize the focus on all financing sources. So that is public, private, domestic, and international. And that's critically important in the context of the INFF. So a snapshot of the guidance, of course, over the course of a few minutes, I won't be able to go into all the details, but we did just want to provide a quick snapshot of some of the pieces that are covered in the guidance. So we do have an emphasis on and information on the inception phase. So this is really around, establishing and fostering political dialogue. And here again, just to emphasize this idea of the inclusion of gender experts, advocates, the gender machinery, the gender ministry, whatever configuration that is within the country context, that's critically important from the very beginning, as well as really this mapping and identifying of policy commitments that exist, data and analytical gaps, as I mentioned, related to gender equality, and really linking those and including those in an INFF roadmap, which sets out that sort of framework for the next steps of the INFF, as well as kind of guideposts for where to go from there. as well as there is an emphasis on analysis and diagnostics. This includes gender analysis in the DFA, the Development Finance Assessment, as well as a multitude of other diagnostics of public and private financing. And it's looking to really assess the extent to which gender is mainstreamed in existing policies and strategies. And it does include information and questions related to whether or not gender responsive budgeting has been introduced in relation to the national public budget, as well as analysis and guidance through questions around the necessary analysis of private financing flows, including, by no means exclusively, but in relation to financial inclusion and women's economic empowerment. And then turning to the financing strategy, some of the questions and the information included in the guidance focuses on analyzing the extent to which gender equality is included in current financing policies, identifying how those financing policies can be adjusted, revised, refined, or even new financing policies perhaps introduced to be more gender responsive, so that this overarching strategy is one that works towards and links financing with gender equality objectives. And considering different options, such as key performance indicators in MTEFs and/or financing instruments with explicit gender objectives. And finally, on monitoring and review, just to highlight a few points, there's emphasis on examining whether or not tracking systems, both in terms of public resources as well as private resources, are in place to monitor flows to gender responsive policies or programs, as well as initiatives that aim to address gender inequalities and advance women's empowerment. So to turn a bit to maybe some of the process, or a little bit more around using the guidance, this is, as I mentioned, question-based, and it's a question-based approach really because it's intended to initiate thinking around how to best interrogate current policies, current financing policies, as well as how to then use that information to inform the framing and the development of new interventions, new policy approaches that really do strengthen the integration and mainstreaming of gender across all financing flows. Users can select which questions to use and answer at different stages of the process. So it's by no means intended to be a guidance that you have to do all or nothing, but it is really structured in a way so that you can use it hopefully across the course of the INFF process. And we do want to emphasize again that it's recommended to approach this through a dialogue-based consultative approach so that responses to the questions that are included can really include and incorporate various perspectives, because we know how important that is to gain the fullest understanding of the situation. It does also include a set of case examples, which are really intended to provide initial ideas of entry points and approaches to integrate gender analysis into the INFF development. And here I just want to emphasize again that this is a living document. It's one that we aim to really continue to expand with a focus on featuring more country experiences, both in terms of progress and challenges to support learning over time. And we will really be depending on all of you who are here tonight, at least tonight here where I am, to really contribute to this and to bring those experiences to bear on the guidance, because that will really help to make it really pertinent and applicable and useful as we move forward. So I just wanted to touch briefly on SDG Indicator 5C1. And the reason for this is that the guidance does include reference to this SDG indicator, which monitors the proportion of countries with systems to track and make public allocations for gender equality. And the reason I'm mentioning this as well is because this SDG indicator links very much and does provide this international standard for gender responsive budgeting. And so it can be, and the information contained in its methodology can be used to report and to conduct assessments of the strengths and gaps in tracking systems to analyze, monitor, and evaluate gender budget allocations. And the information then can be used to support actions at country level to improve those systems over time. And the global monitoring of the indicator is led by UN Women together with UNDP and the OECD, with the next data collection round in this year, 2021. And this is just to emphasize kind of the linkages between the guidance, the information contained therein, the work on areas like systems, tracking systems for public financing, and how that information comes to bear in some of these other kind of discussions around global monitoring, et cetera. So just in the next couple of minutes, I just wanted to touch on a few final points. So here I wanted to give a broad overview of the recommendations that are contained in the guidance note. And I won't go into all of the detail, but I just wanted to emphasize here again, this idea of multi-stakeholder engagement as well as multi-stakeholder action. So you can see that there are recommendations related to government action, including, as I've mentioned, consultations that actively engage gender machineries, women's organizations, potential inclusion of the gender ministry on the INFF oversight committee, as well as other recommendations, as well as civil society action. So these include recommendations related to advocacy for meaningful engagement of women's organizations in the INFF development, as well as really the role of civil society to engage in and support and contribute analyses. There are also recommendations related to UN system action in terms of both the promotion of engagement of gender experts, as well as provision of and support for guidance and tools to ensure gender analysis of policies, financing flows, and budget processes, as well as a few recommendations that are targeted to the private sector, which do focus almost not exclusively, but specifically on tracking and publishing sex disaggregated data, on investments, as well as advocating for areas like women's economic empowerment in the private sector. And finally, in terms of the guidance itself, I just wanted to highlight that there are these annexes that are part of the guidance, and these are organized by sort of these different categories that are phases in alignment with the phases of the INFF process. And they really are aimed at linking these focused areas with the identified frameworks, systems, or processes under that focus, as well as potential gender mainstreaming interventions within the system or process. And so they're quite detailed. And just to give you a sense of some of the information contained therein, there are, there's information related to policy-oriented actions, such as mainstreaming gender objectives in the National Development Strategy or National Sustainable Development Strategy, as well as information on assessment of the financial landscape, the financing strategy, monitoring and review, and transparency and accountability. So I really would urge everyone to look at the guidance as a whole package, and that these annexes can really give this more deep dive and also make those linkages between what type of data sources, frameworks, et cetera, can be used to introduce these different gender mainstreaming approaches and steps. So finally, in terms of next steps, we would ask that all of you please do review the guidance and apply it as appropriate to your national context, as well as the stage where you are in INFF development. And certainly we would ask for you to consider sharing experiences and working to mainstream gender equality in the INFFs at each stage of the process. And UN Women and UNDP certainly stand ready and are available to provide additional information and support in applying the guidance at country level. And I just here wanted to highlight that the technical guidance note will be made available on the INFF website. And again, that we aim to update this over time to reflect these very critically important country experiences, as well as lessons learned and additional information. Thank you so much. And for any follow-up questions, please do contact either Manita Ray at UNDP or myself, Catherine Gifford at UN Women. And I think here I'm just going to stop. I'll stop sharing my screen just for a moment, because I'm going to have the pleasure of handing over to 2 country presentations in just one moment. So bear with me while I get those slides ready. Thank you so much. So now I have the pleasure of handing over to my colleague, Sohel Rana, who is based in the UN Women Bangladesh office. And he will be sharing some experiences, reflections from Bangladesh in the first stages of introducing and beginning to endeavor to integrate gender equality into the INFF. So I will get your slides up, Sohel, unless you would prefer to run them from your side.
Hi, Catherine. It would be good if I can run the PowerPoint. Yeah.
Over to you. Thank you so much.
Hi colleagues, I hope you can hear me. Yes. So thank you so much, Kathy and other colleagues for giving us this opportunity to share our initial work on INFF. And this is a great opportunity for Bangladesh to share our perspective with a better audience. So as you may know that in Bangladesh, we are having a joint project with UNDP, UNCDF, ILO to implement the INFF development as well as to have a better, integrated national financing framework for SDG financing. So through this, objective to have a better integrated framework at the national level, we have started doing our work back in 2020, at the end of 2020, and we have developed some of the initial work so far. So let me take you through the key, building blocks of the joint project. We have 4 key building blocks for this joint project. The first one is on DFA. So we are, for your information, in Bangladesh, the first DFA was conducted back in 2016. That was a kind of, DFA diagnostic. And through this joint project, we are updating the DFA, considering the middle income country status that Bangladesh is aspiring to achieve by 2024. We are considering the COVID-19 aftershocks and the recovery measures, and we are also considering the private investments in order to finance SDGs in the context of Bangladesh. The second key area or the building block for this joint project is to develop a financing strategy. So the financing strategy will be developed based on the DFA update, DFA that will be updated from our initial intervention, and the financing strategy will be focusing on the middle income countries aspiration as well as the COVID-19 recovery phase. The financing strategy will be mostly focusing on the private investment because I will show you later on that the private investment is one of the key elements for having adequate financing for SDGs implementation in Bangladesh. And the third key area is to have bankable projects. For your information, this joint project is focusing on 3 particular SDGs. One is on worsen, the second one is on climate change, and the third one is on renewable energy. So this project will be making some kind of scenario to have a pathway to have better financing to some of the projects to showcase how this SDGs can be implemented to public and private financing. And the fourth one is public and private financing landscape. And under this area, we are planning to do SDG investor mapping, where we are in the process of having a national level multi-stakeholder platform for SDG financing, where we are bringing both public and private sector under one platform. And we are also bringing private sector impact management platform, and this interfacing between public and private sector is most critical to have better financing in the SDGs in the context of Bangladesh through the INFF. So in the context of Bangladesh, you probably know that now we are having the 8th national 5-year plan, and before that we had the 7th 5-year plan. And in the 7th 5-year plan, we saw that there was around 928 billion financing gap, and the private sector was one of the key entity to fill out that gap, but unfortunately we couldn't manage to overcome the gap that we had for SDG financing under 7th 5-year plan. And the 8th 5-year plan was adopted in 2020, and in this particular 5-year plan, we are saying that around 80% of the resources are projected to be coming from the private sector. So it means that private sector's investment is most critical and crucial for having a better SDG financing strategy in Bangladesh. And tax reform is one of the areas where we are giving emphasis to have better taxation system within the country so that we can have better financing for both private sector as well as from different stakeholders. So this is the most important part, how actually we are trying to mainstream gender within the DFA as well as in the INFF process. So for DFA, we are taking 5 steps to have gender mainstreaming within the updating of the DFA. First one is the review of the structure of the DFA document. As I mentioned earlier, that we had the first DFA, and it was developed back in 2016. So based on the first draft or the first diagnostic that we have, we are now updating the DFA, and we have seen that in the first DFA there was actually not mention about gender in most of the macro level areas. So this first step of reviewing the structure of DFA would give us the opportunity to have mainstream gender within the process. The second step is to incorporate gender perspective into the DFA process, as I mentioned before. So while reviewing the structure, we are also preparing to have a gender perspective within the DFA process. The third one is review of national and international gender commitments into the national development financing agenda, which means that we have both SDG commitments. We have commitments from CEDAW, we have commitments from Beijing, and and also we have commitments from the 8th Five-Year Plan. So we are considering all these commitments, and we are bringing all these gender-related commitments into the DFA update process. And this is a kind of important work to have proper gender integration within the DFA with the reference of national and international commitments to gender equality. The fourth one is in relation to the previous one. We are analyzing different indicators, mostly from the SDG indicators, and these indicators are mostly gender-related indicators, and we are analyzing these indicators for having better analysis of the gender context in Bangladesh, and we're incorporating this gender analysis based on the indicators into the DFA assessment or analysis process. The first step is the incorporation of gender-responsive budgeting mechanism within the DFA process. As you know, that Bangladesh has been practicing gender-responsive budgeting for the last 9 years or so. So gender-responsive budgeting has been institutionalized in Bangladesh, but it has not been integrated in the DFA process. So we are bringing this very important tool within the DFA analysis. And when we are reviewing the DFA, we are putting gender-responsive budgeting as one of the key tools to be used to advance gender equality in the DFA, as well as in the financing process within the INFF. For the INFF, what we are doing, as I mentioned earlier, that we are focusing on 3 SDGs, and here we have mentioned that we'll be focusing on 4 SDGs, SDGs 6, 7, 13, and 17, and we will be also focusing on the indicators of 8th Five-Year Plan, which are nationally owned indicators, and our Prime Minister's office has come up with 39+1 indicator, and gender indicators are already included in the country priority indicators. So we are analyzing all these indicators, both the global indicators and national indicators, in terms of bringing the gender perspective within the INFF process. So we are considering the national and global indicators, and we are also doing gender relevant analysis. We are doing innovative cost measurement of different thematic areas that I mentioned earlier, and we are seeing that the government has increasingly adopting the gender related indicators and commitments, global and national commitments, within its overall national framework, which is very promising for us to have a gender responsive INFF and DFA in the context of Bangladesh. So our work on financing strategy or having the INFF is mostly influenced by three SDG targets and indicators. First of all, the violence against women is one of the key targets of SDGs, which is critical for us to emphasize or highlight within the overall exercise. So we have taken SDG indicator 5.2 as a key indicator to be analyzed in the context of Bangladesh. And we are, for this analysis, we are considering the violence against women survey that we had back in 2015. And we are considering the data through input and output tables to allow different scenarios to be played out within the INFF development process. And we are utilizing government's costs for programs, and we are mostly focusing on the GRB mechanism that has been in the context already. We are also acknowledging the very important indicator which entails unpaid care work in the context of Bangladesh, which is also the indicator SDG indicator 5.4. We are also doing input-output table analysis, and for your information, Bangladesh is doing the time survey in 2021, and we'll be using the data for further analysis on this very important work, because before 2021, there was no data on unpaid care work. So this time survey will give us more opportunity to have more analysis, and this will be bringing this idea and these findings into the INFF process in Bangladesh. And as I mentioned earlier, that we will be focusing on three particular SDGs, and we have seen that particular two SDGs, SDG 6 and 7, if we consider these two SDGs, this will drastically reduce time of women in a number of activities that women carry out in their family life. So we'll be focusing on these two SDGs in terms of bringing our analysis within the whole process. So we have identified some of the key entry points for DFA because now we are updating the DFA, and after having the updated DFA, we'll start working on the financing strategy development. So for DFA, what we are doing, we have identified a few entry points for us to better contribute to the overall DFA update process. So we have seen that DFA will be in line with the national and medium-term development plan and process in the context of Bangladesh, and DFA will give the country a kind of clear roadmap how to have medium and long-term development planning in the context of INFF. And DFA will also will give us opportunity to have SDGs and Addis Ababa Action Agenda in the national planning process. So we are considering the SDGs gender-related commitments, as well as we are reviewing the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, and we will be bringing these two components into the national planning process through the DFA process. And the next one is the DFA will address resource mobilization and identify new source of funding. And we thought that it would be a great opportunity if we have a better organized and better structured DFA that will give us more opportunity to have better funding opportunities, and to have more allocation in these identified sectors. And the most important thing is that in the context of Bangladesh, as I mentioned earlier, that the financing is dependent on the inclusion of private sector within the overall SDG financing framework. So the DFA is also considering the inclusion of private sector, how they can be involved in the process, and how they can contribute to the overall, overall development of DFA, as well as how they can contribute or play their role to have a better financing strategy, and how they can invest more. Another desire for DFA is to have a reform in the expenditure or effectiveness of the budget in the national and in relation to the national planning. And also we think that the DFA will give us an opportunity to have a better structured way for COVID-19 related, recovery measures that the government is taking. So the DFA is also considering the post-COVID, recovery measures that the government will be taking. So the DFA will be a kind of, important tool for the government to have this recovery measure in Bangladesh. So we have identified 3 key entry points for gender mainstreaming these are very important for us to have a better DFA and better FS in the context of Bangladesh. We are saying that a gender impact analysis is very important. As I mentioned earlier, that we'll be focusing on violence against women, we'll be focusing on unpaid care work, and we'll be focusing on gender responsive budgeting. And this gender impact analysis that will give the basis for having a better gender responsive DFA is already in our plan, and we are doing different levels of analysis and different level of sectoral analysis to have better inclusion of gender within the DFA process. We are utilizing the existing mechanism that we have on gender responsive budgeting, and we are incorporating this learning as well as some of the aspiration of gender responsive budgeting within the DFA, so that the DFA can clearly identify gender responsive budgeting as a critical tool for advancing gender equality in Bangladesh. And this gender responsive budgeting will be a helpful tool for having a better financing strategy in the context of Bangladesh. So we are also considering gender responsive budgeting as an important entry point and as an important tool. And we are also considering gender responsive social benefits and tax analysis, and we have given these as equal priority within the overall process. So this is the presentation that I have. I'd be very happy to answer any questions that you may have. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Shohel. Thank you for that incredibly comprehensive presentation. And there will be time for questions, and I'm sure there will be some for the experience in Bangladesh as well as others. But right now, I'm actually going to hand over, if I may, to Salote Meredith from UNDP, who will kindly be sharing information on the overall plan to integrate gender equality into INFFs in Samoa, as well as perhaps some of the risks and challenges that are kind of on the horizon. So if I may hand over to you, Salote.
Thank you, Catherine. Good evening and good afternoon to all our colleagues online. And just a brief introduction before I go on to our slides, that Samoa is also part of the SDG joint program with UN Women and UNDP. And our joint program focuses on 3 outputs, which are the DFA, developing financing strategies, which should be gender responsive, and on public-private co-financing, so developing financing innovative instruments so that it will strengthen the public-private co-financing and prioritizing private sector development and, of course, gender. So our first slide, okay, our first slide is just starts with the
Salote, just let me know if you need us to share the slides or if you'll do it from your side. Ah, great.
Okay, we're just going to start with the simple planning framework for Samoa. And Our main development strategic document is linked to the 14 sectors, which the community sector plan, who is responsible for gender equality. And out of the sectors, they are further linked down to the corporate plans for each government ministry that will be implementing the community sector plan. The next slide, it just shows the national framework on how government is committed to implementing gender equality in Samoa. So we have a national policy for gender. We had one from 2016 to this year, so we're developing a new one. And of course, it's aligned with the new community sector plan. And so on the slide, as you can see, that that's the integration between the two policy documents. Well, despite well-integrated development documents, there may be financing gaps and how gender is reflected in the budget. Because in our planning framework is that it's the corporate plans that are connected to the budget. That's where we may see some gaps, and that's where we want the SDG joint program to address those gaps. On our third slide, we're going to look at the future considerations for gender equality mainstreaming in Samoa through the DFA process. And we must say that through the INFF project, that Samoa will have the opportunity to further mainstream gender equality. And also this guidance that is going to be launched today is really timely. We haven't, it gives us the ability to be able to integrate what needs to be integrated in terms of gender analysis. So starting from this slide, there is a need for assistance to be in place to collect and track the data on gender. In Samoa, we do have data on mainly the social sectors, but our 2018 DFA, there was no gender impact analysis in the financing flow. So for this new DFA, which will be underway soon, it's in the pipeline and we are already negotiating with government. This will ensure that the gender dimensions will be captured in this new DFA. For the financing strategy, as part of our joint program, a gender responsive budget will be considered and implemented under this SDG Component 1 project, and this will be led by UN Women. As mentioned earlier, there are no gender analysis of the different financing flows, and also our M&E are fragmented. We do have, but it's an ad hoc basis. So the INFF will be able to strengthen and be able to integrate these gender projects under the INFF. The other issue that the performance indicator requirements from the development partners, and government thinks that it's too much of a burden on government. For example, that UNDP wants gender indicators, FAO may want food security indicators, and so on. And so we're trying to look at a system where we can, not burden government too much on having these indicators. Our final slide is just on what the risks and analysis and challenges will be for Samoa. there's been unexpected delay and competing priorities, you know, as we all know, the impact of COVID, and also our own local circumstances like our government elections, and we also have a no mission period right now. So our political engagement is an issue, and also the COVID impacts, as well as capacity issues. But we know that these will be integrated into what we're going to have under the activities for the INFF, and also training will be parts of the SDG project to address any capacity issues. Other than that, that's all from Samoa. And if you have any questions, or if my colleagues Christina and Joe are online, they may wish to add to what I've said. But thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Salote, for sharing, and really fantastic to hear about the experience in Samoa, and a really promising example of the collaboration between UNDP, UN Women and UNSCAP, and certainly really important reflections there. So thank you very much. I am now going to hand over, and also just want to recognize our colleague from UN Women Samoa is also here. So I just wanted to mention that as well. So fantastic that she could join us as well. Mele, welcome. So thank you very much. And I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Aroa Santiago, well, all of our colleague, Aroa Santiago, who will kindly be facilitating the Q&A session. So Aroa, please, over to you.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you so much, and thank you, everybody. Well, glad to see some familiar names and happy to meet other colleagues. So, for those who don't know me, Aroa Santiago. I'm part of the gender team at UNDP headquarters, New York, and I coordinate the work on women's economic empowerment, including the work on financing for gender equality. So I'm part of the team, and I just wanted to say that all these interventions have evidenced that when we go together, we are stronger. And it has been very good to see this joint collaboration. So I hope that this technical guidance note and these meetings inspire you to strengthen this joint work between UN Women and UNDP. So now open for reactions, questions, it doesn't necessarily has to be questions. It can be questions to everybody who has been speaking now, but you can just also raise your hand and share your experience. So how you have integrated gender into your work on finance, on INFF, or how do you think you're going to be using the guidelines? What do you think that should be the priorities we should be focusing on? I read that someone was mentioning, what about taxation? Or what about other guidelines that we could also be using together with this one? So open the floor to any of you who may want. You can raise your hand. You can find the raise hand button below on the reactions. So I've also been seeing that there has been some questions in the chat box in the meantime. So maybe I can start with those. Maybe you just want to come in and ask the questions yourself. So maybe Nalini Byrne and Elizabeth Villagomez, any of you want to mention your comments, questions live?
Hi everybody. I have a few questions. I wanted to have your experience of whether you've done any costing in relation to. I know that Bangladesh has talked about it. How precisely, if you're doing some GRB work, are you using the indicator? The processes that you've started with the indicator 5C.1, because I think that should be a very important element. And the third one is really a whole set of issues about how one can get the private sector on board, because my experience is that the private sector is extremely reluctant to actually be transparent, actually amenable to issues of integrating gender. And I'm concerned also about the ways in which public resources are actually out of parliamentary scrutiny, because so much of it is off budget. So if we're using, tracking tools and so on from gender responsive budgeting, and then we find that, there are special purpose vehicles that actually take out public finance and make it totally untransparent. And these involve very critical investment areas. So I think the political dimension, the political economy dimension, is extremely important. I don't think that we have any real solution to that at the moment, but I think really that overall context of the way in which financial flows are going is becoming more challenging. And I just wonder whether any of you have any direct experience with that. Of course, you can do it through taxation, but that too is part of the political agenda of trying to remove taxation, especially on the income side and the corporate side from public from any public scrutiny altogether. Thank you.
Thank you, Nalini, so much. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I mean, picking up on Nalini's point, I think that this is one of the huge challenges, as you saw in Shahel's presentation. I mean, the government is expecting for SDGs to be financed 80% by private financing, that is taxation, plus any other private investment. The thing is, and I don't, I mean, I don't want to point fingers, but for a very long time, for example, even UN agencies have been, and also the World Bank, but they have been telling governments, well, you can have a free export zone, a free trade zone, and that free trade zone will create jobs and blah blah. No. That free trade zone, if you look at how much money the workers actually made in the free trade zone, the impact that the free trade zones had on the local economy where they were placed, et cetera, it turns out that the country lost money, didn't make any money at all. So I think that it's very important to do these costing exercises, to use as much data as possible to show really where the government can really have the power of the taxation, the tax benefit systems really work out for the people. I was just reading about Colombia, and it's almost silly. It's almost silly because you read what what the taxation was about and why he's raising the taxes, and he's saying, well, I'm raising the taxes because I want all these public programs to continue, and they're in principle they look good on paper. Now we don't know if the programs have been evaluated, if they're really the money's getting to the people. But here's where the issue of the political economy, how the countries are actually working, is very important. And of course that this guideline that has been produced is very important from the gender perspective, but I think that it still has like one more level to go, which is in the political economy. That is, how do we show that in fact gender equality, the fact that women have more jobs, that they are paying taxes, or that they are receiving benefits from the government, actually creates a virtuous circle in the economies and for societies. And I think that this gets kind of shut down by the fact that there's still a lot of corruption in many of the countries, and that there's no transparency in, for example, how the tax the tax expenditures are done. In other words, yes, the corporate tax may be 40 or 50%, but what are corporations getting back in return? If you compare it to what people pay, for example, in sales tax every day of their lives just by buying anything in the economy, and what they actually get back, well, you might be surprised that the corporations actually get proportionately more back than, somebody who's just doing their weekly shopping. So I think that this is one of the things that where data and using models that include a more feminist perspective can really help us, to show up what could happen. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Nalini. And on what you were mentioning on making more the case, Canada actually has put at the center of their recovery plan investing in the care economy, because it has, they argue that it has higher fiscal multipliers than other investing in other sectors, because it also increases women's activity rate plus labor intensive. So open to, I assume anyone can come in to reply to Nalini and Elizabeth, but I would specifically like to invite colleagues from Bangladesh and also from Samoa on how they have been addressing the costing of care. And here I would like to mention that we also have a care systems costing tool with ILO developed that can also share in case useful, but open to you to explain how you have done this, and also how you're dealing with the issues of transparency, especially for monitoring and for seeing where money goes.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Sohail from Bangladesh. So yeah, thank you, Nalini, for your questions. And I think Elizabeth has managed to give some of the answers because Elizabeth is supporting us to do some of our analysis. So thank you, Elizabeth. Nalini, for your information, we are doing that the Bangladesh is doing the time survey 2021 for the first time, and the survey findings will come out by December this year. So and the primary data will come by June or July. So definitely the government has a plan to do the costing of the time use survey findings, but it might take some time. But for the violence against women action plan that the National Women Machinery has, they have already did the costing of the violence against women survey. So we'll be using that costing document to have better analysis and to use that costing into our DFA as well as in the INFF process. And another thing, we have in Bangladesh another action plan on National Women Development Policy, and the National Action Plan of National Women Development Policy is still under in updating process. So we'll be using that National Action Policy as well, and the government, specifically the Ministry of Women and Children Affairs, will also be doing the costing this year. So these are some of the opportunities that we have to have the costing of the national plans. About your question in relation to private sector involvement, yes, it is very critical because they are very much reluctant. But what strategy that we took in Bangladesh is to have a platform of private sectors, with the government to have a common understanding on the vision. That how we will be working together and particularly for the 3 SDGs that I have mentioned already, but through the bankable project models, and also through a public-private collaboration method to at least expedite some of the bankable projects within that framework. So we have the platform, private and public sector platform on board. And we had 2 consultations with private sector so far, and we are in the process of having more ownership from the private sector. This is very challenging, but we are trying our best. Over.
Thank you, Sohail. And I wonder, I also saw that we have also UNDP Bangladesh colleagues connected, or maybe Samoa want to also come in.
Hi. I was thinking my colleague here would say something, but in terms of costing gender strategies, as part of the output 2 of our SDG joint program, we put down that we wanted our SDS, the main strategic document for Samoa, to be costed, and as well as 1 or 2 sectors. So governments wanted us to cost the agricultural sector. Samoa has never, other than maybe through the MTIF, the midterm framework, the MTIFs. But we can do this under our current program. In terms of private sector, that's a really interesting question. I mean, we have been also thinking how we can get private sector on board to contribute to sustainable development, especially now, you know, with the challenging times as it is with the COVID impacts. So even our private sector is feeling the pressure. But under the SDG program for Samoa, there is an opportunity to develop a national investment strategy. So this is probably timely as well, that Samoa can actually look at how we're going to develop private sector and how private sector will be able to invest in the, you know, the gender, our gender policy strategies. If Mele or Joe want to add in?
Thank you, Ruti. Hi, colleagues. This is Joseph from Samoa as well. So I'd just like to add on to what Ruti has already alluded to, and also the presentation that was done. So in terms of gender mainstreaming and in terms of the budget, whether the budget for Samoa, in terms of the process itself, whether it's gender responsive, given the current status of the government itself and where the budget it is right now, we can say that in terms of the planning and the policy frameworks of the government, gender is well mainstreamed into the planning process, and this is well reflected in the development of the national strategies, as mentioned by Sarlotse. So this is further then simplified down to the sector levels. And in terms of the monitoring and the tracking of gender mainstreaming into the planning frameworks, we have a monitoring system in place to track this from the planning side. However, the gap and the challenge that we've identified at the moment is that there is a lack in the absence of these tools and these frameworks to track and actually measure how responsive the budget is in terms of gender. So this is the aim of our joint program right now, is that we will be aiming, and hopefully by the end of the project, we will be setting up a system or some sort of framework in place that can actually measure the percentage of the national budget dedicated to support gender activities and also delivering gender priorities of the government. And so I just wanted to add that to what Charlotte has already mentioned, and also the work of the project as well in terms of private sector engagement, as mentioned. So there is a plans of having a strategy in place, and we'll also be providing some sort of capacity building support for both private sector and also the public sector entities to further strengthen this engagement, and particularly public-private resource mobilization. So therefore, that would be the aim of one of the aims of our project as well. And I probably my colleague Mele from UN Women can further add into the discussion from our end here in Samoa. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Indeed, it is evident that we haven't been working enough with the private sector. This is something that we keep mentioning, and redirecting private finance towards the SDGs. Yes, also now there are these debates on on the increasing debt, and usually there is this focus on public debt, while the studies show that actually when financial crises come, it is actually private debt that is behind. So paying more attention to overall finance together, not only public finance, is getting more important. I see Mele Mwalaibao. Please go ahead.
Yeah, talofa love everyone, and thank you so much to my Samoan counterparts who gave a really thorough indication of where the project is at this point. From UN Women's perspective, we are partnering closely with Ministry of Finance to do gender responsive budgeting analysis, and also to seek out those gaps. But like Joseph mentioned, there really is a desire to see how that can actually translate into the private sector. We are moving into that space with civil society. We have another project, the Spotlight Initiative, which I'm sure you're aware of, where we are actually doing gender responsive budgeting training for CSOs and NGOs. So while it is not this project, it aligns with the goals of this project, and ultimately that's the ultimate goal. So I'm looking forward to seeing how, moving forward with government, now that we have Ministry of Finance on board, how we can then see how private sector can be incorporated into these types of workshops. So the more opportunities for webinars, the more opportunities for these types of dialogues to include private sector, I think is a wonderful way forward. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Mele. And exactly, this is one of the major purposes to start having these conversations together, and is to fill in the dots together and start thinking more as in an integrated way, thinking more on what we're doing to transform the system and not just the bits and pieces. So we're all trying to escape from this project-based approach that we used to have. So I hope that this is the start of a process of a continuous conversation between UN Women and UNDP, and that we can start having these working sessions together on specific topics. This is something that we have been discussing. So let's talk about the private finance. Let's talk about taxation. Let's talk about different specific, more technical, concrete entry points to build knowledge, to exchange experience, and to continue working together. Nalini, do you want to come back? We have for discussion for 5 more minutes. So if someone else wants to come in after Nalini, can still do so.
I just have a very quick question. In any of your countries, if you have developed and costed a gender equality plan, how do you actually cost from the gender mainstreaming? I can see that when there's a gender equality targeted intervention, you can actually cost it, and it will come on the, how do you include gender equality in any national financing strategies? But then what do you apportion when it is mainstreaming into that big part of the budget? Any particular concrete issues that you have faced with? Because you can't just say, okay, the gender equality plan will include what you're going to do to reduce gender gaps in education, because that is enormous. But is it that you cost the strategies that will lead you to make the governments or the particular sectors take that into account? This is one of the issues that I have right now in supporting Sudan, for instance, in this process. I know we won't have time to get into it, but I'd very much like to be able, through this conversation, to actually maybe exchange with any of the colleagues in other areas, in other countries, in order to have a kind of more or less a kind of community of practice around it. That would be great. Connect country offices together.
Thank you, Nalini. And this is $1 million question. It is a never-ending question on how you cost when you're fully integrating a gender perspective into everything. When this is actually the actual meaning of gender mainstreaming. So everything is gender responsive. So how you cost that. This is why the gender team at the World Bank decided not to use this gender budgeting, and they use other different approaches because they found exactly this difficulty. But still, you need to measure it somehow to make sure that you redirect funds towards gender equality. So you may need to do some compromises. Actually, here, I think anyone can jump in, but I would like to give the floor to Katie, actually, from UN Women. She is the person who developed the first draft of the technical guidelines, and she's also an expert on gender responsive budgeting. So, so I'm curious what she would have to say, and we have just 2 more minutes. So maybe a minute for Katie, and if someone else just wants to say anything, just please raise the hand. This is your last minute.
Thanks so much, Aroa. Well, in the presence and in the opportunity to engage with Nalini, who I've worked with in the past, as well as Elizabeth, as well as the colleagues from country level, I would regard all of us as experts on GRB. So I just want to kind of recognize that and see that the work that I do is just a very small part of this overarching work. But just to say, I think, I don't know that I have any specific answers right now, but I think the questions and the issues that have been put on the table are really, really important. And I think the idea, you know, UN Women has developed, and Nalini and Elizabeth and others are, I'm sure, very well aware, we have developed guidance on costing gender equality in 2015 with some examples from country experience, particularly related to costing of gender equality policies, gender equality action plans. But of course, we recognize exactly the point that Nalini's raised about the challenges with regards to gender mainstreaming and costing that. So I think this concept or this idea of coming together, as you mentioned, Aroa, some additional technical dialogues, perhaps one of them could certainly be on some of these costing methodologies and where there's opportunity and space for strengthening those, drawing on country experience, as well as opportunities to deepen those and make those assessments with regards to how we might do better costing, especially with regards to gender mainstreaming. On GRB, I mean, yes, I could speak for a long time about gender responsive budgeting, but I don't think I have the time. I will say, to Nalini's point with regards to SDG indicator 5C1, I just wanted to highlight that this is, you know, a global standard, and it is one that we are using to assess, not we, but countries are using to kind of assess where they are in terms of putting in place steps in their PFM system and analyses in their PFM system and approaches that support stronger gender analysis, design, and then allocation of budgets. But recognizing, of course, as I believe Elizabeth referenced, the PEFA module, which is the a specific module on gender equality in PFM. And that actually does include and was very much influenced by the SDG 5C1 methodology. So just to say there are those linkages. And I personally can't speak to the point that Nalini asked about with regards to how closely countries are necessarily kind of applying 5C1 in their GRB practice. But I do think that the first round data that we've collected and this next round of data that will be collected this year really does provide us a lot of useful information, and hopefully also provides countries very, very useful analysis and information to continue to strengthen their systems over time. So I don't think that answers probably any of the questions, but I've tried to give a few reflections. And I think it's really just the start of a conversation. So I'm looking forward to continuing this in the coming webinars, as well as ongoing discussions amongst this group and others. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Katie. So shall I just suggest that anyone who is hungry for a thematical working session on specific topic, just let us know, and we will be very happy to organize as a follow-up. We will also be asking to the second round of the webinar that will happen for the other part of the world, also to see whether they're also interested in that. So I will be handing over now to Tom and again to Katie for some final words before we close. Just let me thank here Manita, right, who has been behind all that and continues to be behind all these preparations, and she is also a contributor to the technical guidance node, and is the person to reach when we work on financing for gender equality. Good to see you, Manita. So just wanted to say thank to you, and also to Divya, who has been also being in the background supporting us. So over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Aroa, and yeah, let me redouble the thanks. Without Manita, you know, we wouldn't be here today having the discussion we're having. But of course, also to thank Katie as well, who really, you know, led the initiative around the guidance. But of course, even more to thank all the participants in the call. I mean, I've learned a huge amount about what's going on at the country level on this particular topic, as well as, you know, the very challenging perspectives that have been shared on how we take it forward. I mean, let me say a few points that I take away from this. Some are at the technical level, and some perhaps more around, you know, the agenda, the coalition that we're trying to build towards the INFF moving forward. I mean, just to connect to some of the questions, I mean, on the costing side, I think it's really important, and all my points are around how do we connect this agenda of integrating gender equality within the INFF to other dimensions of linking finance to impact. And I think that is important for us to consider as we move forward. How do we galvanize momentum around gender equality by supporting and linking to other initiatives on linking finance to impact? You know, when it comes to the costing, for example, you know, the IMF, and you know, I think it's worth recognizing that the IMF, of all the international finance institutions, are placing issues of equity and sustainability at the core of their business in ways that they have never done before. So provide a potential ally and champion for our work that we've never seen before. So as we talk about costing, please recognize also that other agencies like the IMF are conducting costing exercises around the SDGs. How can we work to link the topic that was just discussed around the costing of gender equality within our financing approaches at the country level to those discussions that the IMF is taking forward on broader SDG costing? And of course, they look at it, as you would expect, from a sector-based perspective, which doesn't do justice to equity issues at all. So there is a space there, and in my mind, a demand for our participation and collaboration from the IMF. So it would be great to carry that through that discussion. Tax. I mean, I again, you know, we're seeing a tidal shift. You know, often tax, particularly in developing countries, is pegged as a domestic resource mobilization issue. It's about quantums of finance. But, you know, obviously there have been discussions about progressivity and regressivity in relation to tax policy. But never before have we seen so many sustainable development issues being laid upon the analysis of tax policy. I mean, obviously environment and climate are at the forefront, but we see conversations around health and the impact of tax policy on health. The issues of equity, again, are given a more prominence now in our SDG agenda. So how do we bring the equality issue, the gender equality issue, into that broader discussion of SDG aligned taxation policy? That's another point I think we should continue to discuss. Somebody asked the question around climate finance in the chat. And again, you know, the climate agenda and how we address the financing of the climate agenda is very intricately linked with how we address the issue of financing sustainable development, financing national development plans. And we can't look at climate without looking at the issues of equity that particularly are important, both in terms of the ways in which we move away from brown to green, but also how we adapt in developing countries. So again, how do we link those issues of gender equality to those climate discussions? On the private sector side, we haven't obviously heard from, the full breadth of those 70 countries I mentioned who are working on INFFs. I know that there's some work, for example, in Cabo Verde, and there may be colleagues on the call who know it better, who are trying to establish an investment portal for private sector capital to flow towards investments that encapsulate objectives around women's economic empowerment and gender equality. My point there is there's a lot to learn across the initiatives that we're engaged with. And I think, that would be my penultimate point, that, I think we're just starting a conversation across two agencies here in relation to how we join up our work and finance and our work on gender equality. And as we bring our institutions together around this, how do we really crowdsource the innovations, bring together the knowledge across so many different country practices that together we have as our asset? So I'm really looking forward to thinking through how we manage our knowledge and connect through a community of practice on this topic moving forward. My final point, is, back to this core of the agenda here. And I really want to just leave my final points on the fact that what we're trying to do as the UN is link finance to impact. There has been in the past a very narrow base dialogue, very technocratic discussion of finance, oftentimes trying to treat finance as if there are systems and mechanisms that manage it that don't need to look at impact, because that's a different agenda. That's the policy agenda. There's the mechanics and systems of finance that then, will be aligned by policy. But it doesn't work like that. We know that. And as the UN, I think our endeavor is to bring constituencies that hitherto have not been part of the discussion of financial decision-making, financial policy, and the systems that manage finance. And that, I think, is part of our conversation today. How can we, UNDP and UN Women, work to bring the SDGs as our metric that can bring finance to a discussion of impact? So thanks very much. I'm really looking forward to continuing the conversation, which I believe is really, galvanized by this webinar, this guidance. Thanks again to Katie for leading that, and Manita for her support. And let's keep the conversation going. Over to you, Katie.
Thanks so much, Tom. And I don't think I have much to add. And I know that it's already 11:31 here, so I know that people are probably eager to sign off. But I'll just add a couple of closing points. So I think first, I just want to again echo the thanks to the UNDP colleagues, as well as colleagues in UN Women. So I just want to say it's been a collective, collaborative effort, and it's one that I look forward to continuing. And on the guidance, I just want to point to, I believe it was Elizabeth who said, we've gone to a certain point, but there are further points we can go, including looking at this issue around sort of political economy and political economy analysis, and bringing it back to really the core of the issue, which is people, women's lives, how they're affected, and what it really means when finance is channeled well to support and promote their priorities and address their needs, and how that can really be something that we use and embed in all of our efforts. So I think if we kind of operate from that place, that's one that will guide us along the way. I look forward to continuing the discussion. I appreciate all of the contributions from the colleagues in Bangladesh as well as Samoa, and it's been a fantastic opportunity for learning, and looking forward to more of those in the coming weeks and months. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely day. Lovely night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.